Hey everybody, and welcome back to some more Oxygen Not Included. We're back, it's cycle 476, and I've done a couple of things since the end of the last episode, the most notable of which is probably the change to this room over here. You may notice there is no longer a floor in the room that used to house our rock crusher, which is now above the kitchen, and the reason for that is that between episodes, a couple of our duplicates came very close to starvation because apparently with the floor where it was before, our duplicates could not provide phosphorite to the pincher peppers in order to keep them alive. You'll see they require 1,000 grams of phosphorite per cycle, and between episodes, and maybe even towards the end of the last episode, all of these were just dead. They were not growing. They all required fertilization, and none of them were getting it. And it took me a while to figure out why in the world this was happening, because if we look under agriculture, we've got 65.4 tons of phosphorite, which at the moment is just lying on the ground over in our Draco farm, and I could not for the life in me figure out why our duplicates were not delivering that phosphorite over to the pincher pepper plants. It turns out that they have to deliver it directly to the hydroponic farm tile, and they cannot reach that farm tile from the ground floor here, so they had to do it from the floor above, which means I've had to get rid of the floor so they can now walk in here and deliver that phosphorite. It does mess up our base design a little bit. I am going to have to refigure out how I'm going to do this area over here, but for the time being, our rock crusher has been moved up a little bit, and our duplicates can now once again go back and grow the pincher peppers, which means that hopefully our duplicates don't have to starve going forward and should be able to continue to eat the stuffed berries. I did temporarily allow them to eat gristleberries, but I have gone ahead and disabled that, so they should now be back on that strict stuffed berry diet. And between episodes, I've also gone ahead and set up this little area down at the bottom right here, because what I want to work on in today's episode is trying to turn crude oil into petroleum in a more efficient way than we currently do with the oil refinery up here. So the way we're going to do that, as I hinted to at the end of the last episode, is using the magma right at the bottom of the base here. And the magma is at 1,627 degrees Celsius. It is very, very hot, and using this heat, we can then transfer some of that heat to the crude oil, and if we get the crude oil up to 400 degrees Celsius, that crude oil will then be turned into petroleum at a 1-to-1 ratio, whereas if we do it in the oil refinery, it's at a 2-to-1 ratio. So for every 1 kilogram of crude oil that you put into the oil refinery, you only get half a kilogram of petroleum out, whereas if you can heat the crude oil to 400 degrees Celsius, you turn all of that crude oil into petroleum, which is a much better conversion rate and one that I would be very happy to work with. Now, I did mention at the end of the last episode there being two potential ways that we could go about doing this. One of the ways was using lava, which is what we're going to do in today's episode, but the other idea that I did float about is the possibility of using thermal aquatuners to heat up a large body of crude oil to the point where it boiled over into petroleum. Now, that idea would still work. The only downside is that most of our crude oil right now is hovering around 80 to 90 degrees Celsius, depending on whereabouts in the base it is, and going from 80 degrees Celsius up to 400 degrees Celsius is quite the jump. And although we could then use the 400 degree petroleum to heat up some of the crude oil that's coming in, it does take, it's got a very long startup period. It takes many, many cycles for that initial kind of temperature increase from 80 degrees to 400 degrees Celsius. And so to speed things up a bit, what I'm thinking of doing here is using the power of the lava to heat up our oil initially, and then maybe going forward, once we've got some very hot petroleum, we could then look into using that to kind of kickstart a thermal aquatuner system later on down the line. But nevertheless, I'm getting ahead of myself. The first thing that we're going to do in today's episode is we're going to come over to our metal refinery, and we're going to make quite a bit of tungsten, which you can make from wolframite. It's 100 kilograms of wolframite, makes 100 kilograms of tungsten. Really simple, really easy. I'm going to go ahead and make quite a bit of this. I don't think we quite have that much wolframite just yet. However, we do have 3 ice biomes available to us right now. And prior to today's episode, I did spy this little pocket of wolframite right here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and assign our duplicates to that real quick whilst I talk about why we're going to use tungsten. And the reason we're going to use tungsten is that tungsten has a ridiculously high melting point, which of course is necessary if we're going to be working with magma at 1,630 degrees Celsius. If we try and put buildings made out of iron down here, or even buildings made out of gold, they are just going to melt almost instantly. It's way too hot for anything like that. And so if we go back up to the metal refinery here and we look at the database entry for tungsten, you will see that tungsten has a melting point of 3,421 degrees Celsius. That is a crazy high melting point and is a temperature that we should not get anywhere near close to with our magma down at the bottom of the base. We could also use steel. Steel does also have a very high melting point. The reason why I'm not using steel, at least not for the core part of our build, we will use steel for some parts of the build in today's episode, but not for the most part. And the reason for that is that whilst it does have a very high melting point, 2,426 degrees, which is still, of course, way hotter than the magma, it is more difficult to make. It requires coal, it requires lime, which you of course make from fossil or eggshell, and it requires iron. The iron's not too much of a problem. It's mostly the fossil, the eggshell, the lime, all that kind of stuff that we need. And I know that going forward, if we're going to get into rocketry and if we're going to get into going to space, we're going to need lots and lots and lots and lots of steel. And so trying to conserve all of the lime that we possibly can for when we eventually embark on space travel, I think is probably a good idea. And hence why we're going to use a little bit of tungsten. It's also just easier to make in general, so we're going to go with that for the time being. However, as I mentioned, we do need a little bit of steel in today's episode, and so I will go ahead and schedule a little bit of refined carbon over here in the kiln, and I will also go ahead and schedule a little bit of lime over here in the rock crusher. Now, we do have 8.6 tons of fossil now, so I guess I'll go ahead and make this out of fossil this time around. That is because I've dug out quite a bit of this section here. There was like a long line of fossil in this area. You can see there's even more of it still to be dug out yet. And so there is still quite a bit of fossil lying around for us to harvest, which is real nice. I did set up a waterlock down here. You'll notice that there is now a fluid pipe going all the way from up here. I did also go ahead and build up to get more water in this area here with our liquid pump, and I pumped all of that polluted water down to very near the bottom of the base. And my idea behind building this very long pipe and this very low down waterlock was that initially what I wanted to create a vacuum on the other side of the waterlock here. And initially there was a vacuum here when I dug out, so I put the waterlock in and then I dug out the diamond to make what was initially a vacuum. However, somehow polluted oxygen has managed to make its way in there. I don't think that polluted water outputs polluted oxygen, although I could be wrong on that. The reason that I chose polluted water is that it has a higher boiling point, and so eventually when we do dig down to the magma here, I was hoping that if any, gas did manage to make its way through, that it wouldn't boil the water. Now, that is still a possibility. At this point in time, I don't really think there's much point in having a waterlock here. It makes almost no sense whatsoever. There's already gas on the other side. The only possible downside here is if this polluted oxygen gets so hot that it then boils this water and turns this into steam, which still is not terrible. I think the worst thing that could possibly happen here is that we just end up with a pool of polluted water kind of along the top here when it, recondenses back into water. So all in all, I don't know if we need this waterlock, but we have it nonetheless. It does look like it is emitting a little bit of polluted oxygen right there. We just saw a little bubble form from the polluted water there. But nevertheless, the plan here is to dig right down, and I will speed this up a little bit. We're going to dig right down to the bottom, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to build metal tile out of tungsten, which we now can do because we've unlocked the tungsten here. And essentially what that's going to do is that's going to rapidly transfer the heat from the magma to whatever the tungsten is touching. So for example, we're probably going to put this right about here, and then we're going to have more tungsten tile right about here. And we do need to be careful with this because if you heat the crude oil up too much, if we go well above the 400 degrees Celsius, we're not only going to boil the crude oil, but we're also going to boil the petroleum that comes from that crude oil. And if we boil the petroleum, then it turns into sour gas, which is not what we're looking for right now. Right now, we really just want to get to that petroleum. I believe that the petroleum boils at about 550-ish degrees Celsius. Yeah, 538.9 degrees Celsius. And then it freezes at negative 57. So what we want to do is we want to try and heat up the oil just enough to get it over that 400 degree mark, but not so much so that it goes above 540 degrees Celsius. And to do that, we're going to have a door in the middle of these two tiles. And we're going to make that door out of steel because you can't make a door out of tungsten. I'm not quite sure why, but we're going to have to make it out of steel. And so the door is going to go right about here between the two metal tiles. And then using a thermosensor, what we can do is we can specify whether or not this door is open or closed, and in doing so we can determine whether or not we want heat to transfer through both of these tiles or not, because if the door is open, then the heat will not transfer through. It will come into this tile and then stay there. If the door is closed, then the heat will transfer right through this tile, through the door, through the next tile, and into what will be eventually a room full of crude oil. that's the plan. We'll see how well it works going forward here. For now, I'm going to go ahead and cancel that door there, because I know if I don't, they're going to come build that out of something that is not steel. Speaking of which, do we have steel ready to be made? We do not. They're still scheduling quite a bit of tungsten, and we also do not have enough lime just yet. So I'm going to go ahead and bump the priority of our rock crusher just a little bit, because it has gone back down to 5 ever since I replaced it. And whilst they work on that, we have yet more things that we need to work on, because as you may have noticed at the start of today's episode, we did have a warning telling us that in previous cycles, we were not producing enough oxygen. If we look here, you'll see that we're using about 418 kilograms per cycle, and we're producing about 359 kilograms per cycle. And that got me thinking, because we lost a duplicate recently. We should be producing way more oxygen than we're using. And it turns out the reason why we're not producing enough oxygen is that our hydrogen is fully backed up. So the hydrogen produced by the electrolyzer currently doesn't have anywhere to go, and because it's all backed up in this gas reservoir here, we've got 2 gas reservoirs full of hydrogen at this point, this one over here and this one over here, which has emptied up a little bit recently due to the fact that this guy's now online, but previously both of these were full. And so I'm thinking about what I want to do with this. My initial thought was to change the way the battery works. You can see what I've done here. I've set the high threshold to 99% and the low threshold to 90%, doing a similar thing to what we did previously with our natural gas generators and our coal generators, essentially telling the power network to use the hydrogen generator before anything else. And while that has worked in the short term, I think what we probably really want to do is start stockpiling our hydrogen, because I've not played with the space part of this game yet. I've not played with any of the rocket ships or anything like that, but I know that we do need liquid hydrogen for some of our space travel, and so I'm thinking it might not be a terrible idea to just start setting up a couple of gas reservoirs, like a bank of gas reservoirs, to store some of that hydrogen for when we potentially need it to launch a rocket later on down the line. And so for now, I'm going to leave this as is. But as soon as we get this crude oil and petroleum setup up and running, I think I will look to start storing some of this hydrogen in gas reservoirs as opposed to burning it all for fuel, especially due to the fact that, as you can see right now, it's going to take a while to burn through all this hydrogen, and that means that we might end up with a bit of a backlog of natural gas, which is not a huge deal, but it's just not great, right? We've got unlimited natural gas. We don't necessarily have unlimited hydrogen unless we can find a hydrogen geyser on the map, which there might be. Actually, I'm not too sure, honestly. But for now, we don't have one, so we're going to work under the assumption that we should try and store our hydrogen just in case we do actually need it going forward here. So how are we doing on tungsten? We got a good deal of tungsten now. I'm going to go ahead and cancel the remaining 6 here, just so our duplicates can get a little bit of work going on making some of this steel. And then back down here at the bottom of the world, what we're going to do here essentially is have probably a few more tiles on the top here, I think. And again, I do want to make these out of tungsten where possible. So I think we'll do something like this to try and spread out the heat coming in a little bit more when it comes to this top section. We could, of course, put yet more down over here, but in reality, we don't want to be heating the oil up that much. We only want to let a little bit of heat in, just enough to get the oil up to 400 degrees Celsius. And so I think we're going to end up with something that looks a little bit like this. It's not going to be a huge room. I don't think it necessarily needs to be. And essentially, we're going to have something like this with a liquid pump on the left. The liquid pump does need to be made out of steel. Again, you can't make it out of tungsten, and so we do need a steel one to go right there. Hence, we need more steel. We're going to have our thermosensor, which again does either have to be made out of steel or out of tungsten. In this case, we will use tungsten, and we're going to put that right about here. We want that as close to the ground as possible. We want this to be essentially in the hottest place in the room, because if it's not, again, we're going to go too high and we're going to get sour gas, which is not what we're after. So we'll have that there. We also have to make our automation wire out of tungsten, because everything in here is susceptible to melting if it gets too hot. And so we will have this go down to here, which is eventually going to be our door. For now, I'm going to cancel these tiles here, just because I do want to make sure that they get the stuff built below here before they make everything an unreachable build. And so they're almost there with the steel here. We need 100 more kilograms for that to be ready to go. Let's go ahead and replace that automation wire like so. And then we're also going to have, of course, some way for the oil to get in. For now, I think we'll do something like this. And I did mention previously this guy over here, the oil well, or the oil reservoir, which we can activate with our oil well to extract oil and essentially get unlimited oil so long as we pump a kilogram of water per second into that oil well. Now, I'm not going to set this up just yet, because right right now we really don't have that extra 1 kilogram per second of water available for the oil well. As I mentioned previously, if we can get what I believe to be another cool steam vent up here up and running and set up in such a way that it can produce unlimited water for us, at that point we could look to setting the oil well up at that point in time. But for now, I think we're just going to go ahead and try and utilize some of the oil that is already here. Much like with this body of oil over here, which erupted as soon as we opened it up, I did take a look at this oil pocket over here, and you'll see that most of it is kind of around 1 to 2 kilograms. But then if you look at the top here, it skyrockets to 5, 6, even 67,000 kilograms of crude oil in this one tile. I have no idea how it is so high. It's even going up somehow. There's like 73,000 now, 78,000 kilograms of oil in this one tile here. And so if I was to break this open, it would spurt out everywhere. But essentially what I'm thinking is I might just dig a box here, because the way the oil well works is you place it on top of the oil reservoir and then you pump water into it and it just dumps the oil out into the world. And so no matter what we do here, we are going to have a second liquid pump to actually pump the liquid that the oil well dumps out. And so essentially what I'm thinking is if we go ahead and we get ourselves some kind of chamber here, for example, something that looks maybe a little bit like this. We do want to make sure that we don't go into the lava. Right about there should be fine. If we do something like this, we could then dig this out and then hopefully dig this as well and have it all fall into here, stick down a liquid pump in the bottom right hand corner and begin pumping that oil over and into this room here for it to be turned into petroleum and then used for plastic, used for oil, and I think eventually we can also use it as fuel for space travel as well. So that's the plan there. And another cool thing that we can do with it actually is if we do use the petroleum for a petroleum generator, we can actually generate water from this system, because if we go ahead and look over at the oil well, which is over in utilities, yeah, this one here, the oil well produces 3,333.33 grams per second of crude oil, and if we can successfully heat that much oil into petroleum, if we can heat 3,000 grams per second and turn it into petroleum fast enough, we will therefore produce 3,333.33 grams per second of petroleum. And if you put that petroleum into a petroleum generator, you turn it not only into power, and quite a substantial amount as well, 2,000 watts of power, you also produce carbon dioxide and, crucially, 750 grams per second of polluted water for every 2,000 grams per second of petroleum that you pump in. And so if we were to have two petroleum generators, one consuming 2,000 grams and one consuming the remaining 1,333.33 grams, that means that essentially we can produce 1,250 grams per second of polluted water by only pumping in 1,000 grams per second into the oil well. And so really, if we do take all of that petroleum and pump it into petroleum generators, we can create a self-sufficient system that produces enough water to keep the oil well going, as well as a surplus of 250 grams per second of water. And on top of that, it also produces somewhere in the region of 3.3 kilowatts of power. So I think that's what we might end up doing. That's going to open up a lot of opportunities for us to build and expand into new areas. If we have, a surplus of about 3,000 watts compared to what we have right now, it will allow us to tinker with, more thermal aquatuners and more of the machines that require just a ridiculous amount of power. The only downside, of course, being that whole setup will bring more heat into the base, because when you start the game, all of this lava, whilst very hot, is trapped under this thick layer of abyssalite. And if we look at this, you'll see that even though the bottom layer of abyssalite here is very, very hot, the abyssalite has a thermal conductivity of 0, and so the heat doesn't transfer through the abyssalite into the base. What we're doing here is essentially bringing that heat from the magma up and into the base. Now, I think we can mitigate this a little bit by having the oil that we pump out of the oil reservoir go through maybe like a chamber. For example, if we take the 400-degree petroleum and we dump that into another big old tank like this one over here, but this time if we have a big old tank of petroleum and we have the crude oil running through it in radiant pipes, what we should be able to do is significantly increase the temperature of the oil from its starting 85, 90 degrees Celsius up to closer to 400 degrees, thus requiring less of the heat to come from the magma. And at the same time, we can also cool down the petroleum so it's less hot for when we go and use it for whatever we end up using it for in the future. So that's the plan, at least. I know I just threw out a lot of information there and a lot of words. So real quick, I'm going to go ahead and set this to a priority 8 so that hopefully our duplicates will come and get this done. I will go ahead and dig out all of this here so they can actually get down to that bottom tile. How are we doing in terms of steel, we are good to go. So we should now be able to go ahead and put down our steel door, which we can. We've got 500 steel. I would prefer a little bit more steel because, of course, we are going to need it for our liquid pump here. And real quick, I am doing a lot of clicking and dragging to get up to these areas. One thing that people did point out to me a little while ago that I've yet to use is a feature where if you, I think it's Control and 1, and then if I press Shift 1, there we go. Okay, so what you can do is if you go to an area, for example, if I go down to this area here and I press Control 2, now what I can do is I can go anywhere on the map, and if I press Shift 2, it takes me to this area. And just a second ago, I pressed Control 1 up by the oil refinery, and so now if I press Shift 1, it will take me directly back up to the oil refinery. And so I think I might use this. It's going to make, my life a little easier instead of having to click and drag all over the place. We could set up a few more as well, but for now, I think this is the area that we're going to be spending a lot of time in today's episode. And so going from the metal refinery down to the magma here should be fine for the time being. I am going to set the thermal sensor right now to output a green signal if its temperature is above 0, essentially. I want this outputting a green signal right away, because what I don't want to happen is I don't want this room here to get too hot too fast and then start to actually, turn the crude oil into sour gas before we've even got the setup up and running. And so really I want to try and keep this open as long as possible so that this room stays as cool as possible until we get all of the oil pumped in. And speaking of oil, let's go ahead and also make it possible for our duplicants to get over to this room here. I would prefer it if this polluted water here didn't end up in our oil tank. And so for now, we'll do something like this. Hopefully the oil will kind of settle down here, and then we'll dig out in this direction, and we'll have a ladder that just goes down to here. We'll set all of that to priority 8, like so. And then as soon as all of that is dug out, we can then go ahead and potentially try digging this out. I have a feeling that there's even too much oil in here for this box. I think if we try and pop this, it's going to go ahead and overflow yet more, but really there's nowhere for it to go. And so at worst, it would kind of come up into this area here, which wouldn't be great, but I'm really hoping there's just not that much crude oil in there. If there is, we might have to kind of enter a damage control mode, and maybe this polluted water will help us, although likely not. It might just kind of spill over and then turn into steam and mess the whole system up. I'm really hoping that's not what happens, but we will find out. Real quick, can I get a priority 9 dig further down? Because I do not wish for that water to end up in this tank here. I would really prefer it if this polluted water would come down here. No, I'm going to cancel this real quick, and I'm going to cancel these as well. No, please do not, please do not infiltrate any of this with the polluted water. Can I mop that up? I can schedule it, although I don't know if that's gonna work. I can build more ladders here, and we can see if it works. But I'm not too confident right now that this is gonna work. Although it might do, actually, if we keep too much liquid. There might be a little bit of polluted water in here. It's not a huge deal. If a little bit of polluted water makes its way over into here, it just means that we have a little bit of steam at the top, or maybe even up into here as well. I do intend to shut this off, close this off entirely eventually. I might even put a steel door in just so that our duplicants can get in if necessary. But nevertheless, we will, for now, I'm just going to go ahead and let that polluted water come in. I think most of it has been, mitigated here to the sidelines. So for now, we'll go ahead, we'll let them build this. We'll go ahead and throw down a pump. This pump doesn't need to be anywhere near as strong as the previous pumps. I think a gold pump should work out just fine. The room here is not going to get above 100 degrees Celsius, I don't think. And so for the time being, we'll have that come out of here. I think regular pipe will probably do just fine in this scenario. I don't think we need either insulated or radiant pipe. So we'll go up to there. We will then delete this pipe here, like so, and then we'll just have this pipe over on this side. Continue on across, and we'll go up and around so we don't break the water lock, and then we'll go down and across, like so. So a little while later, and we have a setup that's looking a lot closer to what I envisioned here. Now, we are getting a damage overheating warning from our steel liquid pump here. That is because right now, the polluted oxygen in this room is very, very hot. Down here, it's nearly 900 degrees Celsius. I'm hoping that as soon as we pump in the oil from over here, it should cool down quite a bit. It should soak up quite a bit of that heat and take it away from the liquid pump. Now, I'm not quite sure what happened over here. You'll see that we've got a couple of things going on. One, there is obviously polluted water and regular water in here, which is not great, but also quite a lot of the crude oil instantly turned into petroleum. And I don't know why this happened. There is some very hot abyssalite here, 1,000 degrees, that the oil did touch, But the thing that confuses me is that the petroleum is not that hot. The petroleum's only at 90 degrees Celsius, and so it's almost like the crude oil got very, very hot and then also simultaneously cooled down the petroleum a ton as well. There's also a lot of sour gas here as well, implying that the petroleum got so hot that it turned into sour gas. I'm not quite sure what happened there or why this is the way it is, but it seems to have happened nonetheless. It's fine for the time being. Having sour gas here doesn't really matter too much, and having petroleum in this room over here is also not a bad thing. I am setting up this tank here. This is going to be where we're going to store some of our petroleum for the time being. I am going to go ahead and start pumping the crude oil / petroleum mixture in. Right now I just deleted this pipe to make sure that it wouldn't go in before we were ready, but I think it is now pretty much good to go. I'm going to set the repair on this to priority 9, so somebody will come and repair that fairly soon here. I would like, preferably though, the pipe to be fixed first, so I'm going to real quick lower that priority, because I would very much like this to be built and then someone to come and fix this, because otherwise we're just wasting steel. It's going to overheat again very soon here. Also, I think one thing that we probably should do here is build some temp shift plates just to equalize the temperature in this chamber here. And given that we now have access to diamond, given that we've dug out quite a bit of this area here, I feel like we might as well. Diamond, I believe, is the best when it comes to dispersing heat through the temp shift plates here. So we'll build some of those. You'll see that right away here, it's turning some of this crude oil into petroleum. We are also getting some sour gas. That's just because it's so hot right out of the gate here. Hopefully this will equalize as time goes on, and the temperature in this room should come right down. You'll see the steam here is about 120 degrees Celsius. That is escaping up here and might start to... yeah, that could be an issue, actually. I really don't want that much water in here. Like I said, there's not a whole lot I can do about it outside of close this door, because this is already here, and we can't release that into here. This is where the petroleum is intended to go. I don't think it's going to be a problem. There is a lot of high-pressure steam in here, but I think it should be fine. So we're going to go back and set the fixing of this pump to, like, priority now. I have run power down to both of these pumps from the base, quite a long power line coming all the way down here. This is still pumping away, which is quite nice. We can always go ahead and dig into here once we run out of petroleum. But hopefully they will come and fix this any second now. They have. And then we're going to set our thermosensor to close the door if the temperature is above or below. Hold on, we want to send out a green signal if the temperature is below, let's say, 410 degrees Celsius. That gives it a little bit of wiggle room. If we set it to just 400, then it's quite possible that whilst this might be petroleum, this might not. And so if we give it a bit of a buffer, if we say 410 degrees Celsius, that should hopefully mean that this whole room is petroleum by the time that we turn the pump on. And then when we turn the pump on, we're going to go ahead and pump out of this room and essentially directly over and into here. Like so. And the plan is, as soon as we get a decent amount of petroleum in this room here, we can then start running the crude oil through this room to increase its temperature before we get into here, thus requiring less of the heat from the lava, as I mentioned earlier in the episode. And that should just make our setup just that little bit more efficient. Right now, oh, my bad, actually. Real quick, can we come and disable this building, like priority now? That is not how that is supposed to work. We need automation wire, because what we want to do is we want to make sure that a green signal is only sent to the pump if we're above 410 degrees Celsius. And so we also have to attach it to the thermosensor here as well. Have I done that right? I don't think I have. We need a green signal if the temperature is above 410, because below 410, we want this to be closed. Yes, and above 410, we also want this to be off. So this is the wrong way around. When we turn this off, you'll see that right now the temperature in here is 186 degrees, but as soon as we close it, the temperature rapidly begins to increase. We can go ahead and re-enable this now as well. So let's enable building. There we go. And so you'll see that this is rapidly increasing the temperature. We're coming in, on close to 300 degrees Celsius very, very quickly here. I am really hoping this does have an overheat temperature of 275 degrees Celsius, which is admittedly not as high as I would like. I don't think that there's really any other material we can make this out of. Presumably there is. There must be, right? I don't think we can make it out of tungsten. And ideally, we don't want what's happening now. We don't want this to be continually repaired on a top priority. That's not ideal. It does use a lot of steel. This might just not work. All right, so quite a few cycles later, and I figured that we would have to try something different, because clearly the previous setup was not going to work. We do not yet have the materials required to build a pump that can get to 400 degrees Celsius. And so my thinking here is, what if we put another door right about here that opens when we get to 410 degrees Celsius, thus allowing the petroleum to flow out along here down, and then back along this way. And essentially what I've done is I've redirected the oil pipes. Now, all of the oil that comes from our reservoir eventually, for now it's going to come from this body of crude oil here, but all of our crude oil comes through this pipe, goes down, we can delete this pipe here and here, we don't need those anymore. It comes down, under, and then comes to here where it switches to radiant pipe, at which point it then flows in the opposite direction to the direction that our petroleum is going to be flowing in, and is hopefully going to cool down that petroleum whilst simultaneously heating up the crude oil for it then to be dumped into this room here. Hopefully it's not going to heat it up too much that it turns into petroleum in the pipe. I don't know if that would damage the pipe because they're both liquids, but I guess it does. It would be a bad thing if it got to 500 degrees, but that shouldn't be possible because the petroleum's not that hot anyway. And so I think this should work. The only way it wouldn't work, I think, is if it was too hot when it got here for what is going to be a liquid pump. We need a little bit more steel, but I think even if the eventual petroleum that does reach the very end of the chain, even if that is still hot, even if that is still above the, I think, 275 degree limit that our steel pump has, I think the fact that it's not going to be fully submerged in that petroleum should help it not reach that 275 degree mark. Ideally, I guess we're going to find out how this works. So I do want to put a door in here. I would love to get the pump down first. And then essentially, once we get the pump down, we're just going to pump it back around and into this tank here. I guess now there's no real need for this tank because we're not going to pump the oil through this tank because we want to cool the oil down before it gets pumped. And so at this point in time, we could probably just pump it into reservoirs. But for now, I'll leave it in here just so we can get a feel as to whether or not this setup here is going to work. A lot of sour gas here, which I'm still a little confused by. I'm not quite sure why we've got such cool sour gas in and around this area. Let me know in the comment section if you know why. I did also have to make a slight change to the way that our water works because we needed a lot of refined metal to make the radiant pipe. And so one problem we were having is, one, that not enough cool water was coming in for the refinery, and that is because we were not getting enough water in and through our aqua tuna. Like, there just wasn't enough water coming in for the aqua tuna to cool, and thus everything was kind of slowing down. Even our crops up here stopped growing because they didn't have enough water. And you can see this is becoming an issue again. Now we're at 33 degrees Celsius. You see the temperature of the base is very, very cool right now. I'm very happy with how cool it is, but at the same time, it's not hot enough for these pincher peppers. I might just end up moving these pincher peppers so that I can reinstate this floor and then maybe use this room for something else. If we just start growing them, like, maybe in this room here, underneath the power gen, it is going to be a long trek to get the food from here up to here. Maybe we could do that with machines. We could use like auto sweepers potentially to do that. But either way, I think I might move this just so we don't have to worry about heating this area up for the pincher peppers. But for now, there is a little bit of polluted water there. Let me quickly get rid of that. But for now, essentially, we needed to get more water in. And another problem was that the water here is fully backed up. We've got like 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 full reservoirs of water here, and so all the water coming out of this setup didn't have anywhere to go. Therefore, the cool steam vent was overpressurized, the steam wasn't going anywhere, the steam turbines couldn't output their water, and so for now what I've done is I've redirected it so that the water coming from the steam vent will try and go in here if it can, but if not, it will go across and over and into these reservoirs, which then pump around into the aqua tuna. That does mean we might end up with some slightly hotter water. You can see the water now closer to 40 degrees than the 35 that we saw earlier. That's still not too bad. 45 minus the 14 degrees that it takes away is still 26 degrees Celsius, and I think it's okay to have water at 26 degrees Celsius pumping around the base. So long as it's not like 35 degree water, that's when I think we're going to start having an issue. So for now, it's kind of temporary. You can see the water over here is like 51, 52 degrees Celsius, which is maybe a little too hot for the base here, especially even once it's cooled down, it's still going to be around 35. And so I might go ahead and change that again at some point, but for now we just didn't have the water to get the metal refinery working, and so temporarily it's been changed so that the metal refinery can do its thing and produce the radiant pipe for this area down here. And so now it's time to see if this is actually going to work. So I would like them to delete these 2 tiles here. We'll set this to priority 9 and we'll delete these 2 tiles, at which point we're going to put a door in here set up to the same automation as this door down here, so that when this door is open at above 410 degrees Celsius, like it is right now, this door is also open and the petroleum can flow on out and hopefully get cooled down before it then gets picked up at the very bottom end there. We are going to need yet more steel as well, my goodness. But this is the plan. I probably should have put down this pipe first. I'm going to make like a top priority, because I would like that to be built soon because I want it pumping through. I want it cooling down this petroleum here. You can see already it is cooling down just as it goes through here. Eventually this area is going to heat up though, and so eventually we're not going to get that kind of passive cooling that we're getting right now. But there's the pipe. And so now we should see, if we speed things up a little bit here, all of this coming down in this direction. Now I'm really hoping that this works the way I think it's going to work. I will go ahead and schedule a door to be placed right about here. I don't think it needs power. Honestly, it doesn't really matter how slow or fast it is to open, but I will, of course, go ahead and hook it up to this. You can see straight away the doors closing when the oil comes in and it gets too cold. I think this will work out just fine. I think as more and more petroleum builds up in here, more and more should spill over this way. Thankfully, it is going quite slowly to the point where when it's down here, it's kind of reaching, 150 degrees Celsius. I think this might actually work. So there is no more... I don't know what's going on here, but this has stopped working. So what I will try now, I guess, is getting the ladder out and building up into here. This can be priority 9. It doesn't need to be top priority. But if we dig into here, we should see quite a large amount of oil coming down into this area, at which point we should be able to see this working in action. And I think this might work. It's not quite as elegant a setup as I was intending, but I think it might just get the job done. We do need more lime. Ever more lime, constantly never-ending amounts of lime, because we do need more steel for that steel pump. It's possible we could get away with not making the pump out of steel, because it looks like it is getting quite cool by the time it gets down here, like around 114 degrees Celsius is quite cold. Now there's no guarantee it's going to stay like that, so I would like to, just for safety's sake, have a steel pump down there, just on the off chance that's not what happens. But there you go, there is all of that oil flowing down. It looks like hopefully this room, it's behaving in a weird way, but it looks like this room should be big enough, hopefully, for all of this oil here that's coming in. Although maybe not. We do have a no power warning. I have a feeling that's probably due to I was going to say to a broken wire, but it actually might just be due to generators offline. Yeah, no, it seems a bit on and off. Right now it seems to be fine though. It's working. The oil is being pumped around. So the oil comes in at around 89 degrees Celsius, and then as it moves through here, it picks up heat quite rapidly, 114, and then by the time it's over here, it's up at 361 degrees Celsius. So there's really not much work for this room to do at that point. It doesn't have to do a lot of work to get that oil up to 400 degrees Celsius, because it's coming in at almost 400 degrees Celsius anyway, 447, 440. I think this is going to cool down because we're pumping lots and lots of crude oil through here. But in general, I think the idea is sound. It seems to be, temporarily at least, working as intended. So real quick here, do we have what it takes to build this pump? We do, finally. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that to priority 9. We're going to put that right about here. And then we are going to have to do a little bit of kind of pipe gymnastics to get this to where we want it to be. And also this waterlock, I guess we can finally abandon the waterlock now. It's evaporating almost entirely. And so at this point, we then want to take the petroleum, and at this point I don't think it matters if we use, what kind of pipe we use. We're not too bothered about this retaining its heat, but we're also not super bothered about transferring the heat away at this point either. And so I think we can just go across right about here, just because this is kind of the only place where there is still a crossing available, and then have that go across and down and into here. That is going to break the waterlock, like I said, but it's just going to end up in here anyway. There's not much I can do with this right now. I guess I could try and mop it real quick before they break anything else, but it's unmoppable at this point in time. So we'll just let it evaporate and turn into a large amount of steam. Like I said, it's going to condense over here and then continue a cycle of evaporating and condensing. I don't think that's too much of an issue for the most part. But I think, guys, as messy as it is, we do have a system in place that allows us to, and I guess we might as well hook this up if we're on our way, right? Do something like that. But I think we have a system in place that is finally able to turn crude oil into petroleum without the need for any outside heat source. And I think due to the fact that we're heating up the crude oil so massively before it actually gets to its final location, somebody has made a mess, excuse me? Am I working these duplicates too hard? It would seem that I am, just casually making a mess in the petroleum here. There was a little bit of crude oil there. Oh, that's the, okay, there's two parts of crude oil here. There's a tub of crude oil, but there's also a little piece of crude oil as well. It is also possible that the system is not perfect in that regard. Like, some crude oil could make its way through, but it looks like that's not the case. It looks like for the most part, this is working as intended. We're never going to get power down to here. That's like, they've got to go through the tungsten, which is not going to happen. But I think this is working. My friend here appears to be stuck. Oh, of course, we've deleted the place where the waterlock was. Okay, let me put some ladders down. like this so that he can escape. I was wondering why he made a mess. Like, it didn't make much sense. We'll also delete this tile here so you can actually get out there. Okay, so they should be able to get around now in this area, which is much messier than I originally intended this area to be. We are getting sand, which I'm not loving. There is the possibility, long term, real quick, we should delete, we should just like sweep up everything that's in here, like priority 9, just sweep it all away. I don't want anything in this room that could possibly, you know, burn or melt or anything like that. Over time, the magma down here is going to solidify if we cool it down enough. I think if we click on it, it should tell us at what point it's going to freeze. Yeah, so at 1,409 degrees Celsius, this magma is going to freeze into igneous rock. And so it's not a permanent solution. You can see we're already down at like 1,599. We've already brought it down from about 1,600 to 1,599. So a couple of degrees down. It does still have a long way to go to get to 1,409. But essentially, this system is not infinite. The system will stop working eventually once the magma under here solidifies into igneous rock. At that point, we could either move to another location, you know, move it over a few blocks or down a few blocks or something like that, or look into other ways of heating up the petroleum. But for now, I think we have a fairly decent system in place. The petroleum here is 127 degrees Celsius, which is perfectly fine for the liquid pump here. The liquid pump is pumping that petroleum out, storing it in this tank here. And so I think we have a pretty well-functioning system for getting oil, turning it into petroleum, and then pumping that petroleum for further use. Next time we'll come back, we might start looking at the oil well, although for now this seems to be like fine. There's a lot of oil still here for this to pump through, and so I might hold off for a little while, but we'll look at potentially using the petroleum in the making of power with the petroleum generators so that we can actually start to recoup some of that water that we're losing right now. Maybe look at making some more plastic so we can replace some of our tiles, some of our ladders with more plastic like that. And of course, look towards getting to space. The one thing that we did need if we were going to put the liquid pump back in here is thermium. Thermium is made of tungsten and another material, which I've forgotten the name of, but we need to go to space to get it. And so we're going to have to start looking fairly soon at getting our first rocket, launching that into space, building telescopes, digging our way up to the surface, seeing what we can find, seeing if we can make space happen. But for now, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode there. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this mess of a system that I managed to create here for producing petroleum. As always, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to hit like. It will just help out a lot. Leave a comment down below, subscribe if you're new here to get notified as soon as new videos go out. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.